His name is John Goodenough. Say it out loud. Goodenough. It sounds like a consolation prize. Like settling, like the thing you accept when you can't have the thing you actually want. It sounds ordinary. Forgettable. Mediocre. That's wrong. Because John Goodenough is the reason you can read this sentence on a device that fits in your pocket. He's the reason your laptop doesn't need to be plugged into a wall. He's the reason electric cars exist as more than experimental curiosities. He's the reason we can even imagine a future powered by renewable energy instead of burning ancient sunlight we dug out of the ground. And he won the Nobel Prize for this work at age 97, 57 years after his breakthrough. Think about that for a second. 57 years. Most people don't live that long after their greatest achievement. Most people don't even work that long. But Goodenough didn't just wait, he kept working. Past 90, past 95, past 100. You think genius is about being the youngest, the fastest, the first to get recognized. You assume brilliance announces itself. Early child prodigies, teenage innovators, 20-something founders who change the world before they can legally rent a car. That's not what happened here. What happened here breaks every assumption you have about how genius works, when it appears, and what it actually looks like when you're standing close enough to see it. So let me show you. Let me show you what happens when someone sees a structure no one else can see, solves a problem everyone else abandoned, and then waits more than half a century for the world to catch up. Because this isn't a story about being good enough. This is a story about being good enough. This is a story about being right. John Goodenough couldn't read until he was 12 years old. 12. Not because he wasn't trying, not because no one cared, but because his brain processed symbols differently than other kids' brains did. Letters reversed themselves. Words scrambled. The page was chaos. They didn't call it dyslexia back then. They called it slow. His teachers thought he was limited. His classmates thought he was behind. And for years, Goodenough himself probably thought something was broken in the way he understood the world. But here's what actually happened. His brain wasn't broken. It was building something else. A different kind of pattern recognition. A different way of seeing structure. Because when you can't rely on reading words the way everyone else does, you learn to see relationships, spatial arrangements, how things fit together, how systems organize themselves. You learn to think in 3 dimensions. And this weird childhood struggle that looked like a disability, this became the foundation for everything that followed. Because batteries aren't about words, they're about structure, about how atoms arrange themselves in space, about what happens when you move ions through a crystal lattice without collapsing the whole thing. Goodenough saw this in a way other people didn't, not despite his dyslexia, because of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you to 1976, MIT. A young researcher named Stanley Whittingham has just built the first rechargeable lithium battery. 2 volts, not bad, better than anything else at the time, but unstable. Dangerously unstable. The lithium metal would grow these little needle-like structures called dendrites. They pierce through the separator between electrodes, short circuit, sometimes catch fire. You couldn't put this in a consumer product. You couldn't even safely use it in a lab half the time. But the potential was obvious. Lithium is the lightest metal. High energy density. If you could make it stable, if you could solve the dendrite problem, you'd have something revolutionary. Whittingham knew this. The whole field knew this. They just couldn't figure out how. The problem was the cathode, the positive electrode. Whittingham was using titanium disulfide. It worked, barely, but it couldn't hold enough voltage, couldn't handle enough charge-discharge cycles, couldn't scale. And here's the thing, most people moved on. They tried other approaches, different chemistries, different materials. They assumed lithium batteries were a dead end, too dangerous, too limited. They moved on. Goodenough didn't. He was at Oxford by then, 54 years old, already established in solid-state physics, already respected for his work on magnetism and crystal structures. But he wasn't interested in respect. He was interested in the problem, and he saw something everyone else had missed. The issue wasn't lithium itself. The issue was what you paired it with, the structure you embedded it in. The crystal lattice that would hold it while letting it move. Think of it like this. You need a hotel for lithium ions, a place they can check in and check out without the building collapsing. Most materials, when you pull lithium ions out, they fall apart. The structure can't handle the stress. The lattice crumbles. But what if you could find a material with a layered structure, like a deck of cards, where lithium ions could slide between the layers, where removing them didn't destroy the architecture? Goodenough started testing metal oxides, cobalt oxide specifically, lithium cobalt oxide. And here's where the genius shows up. Not in some flash of inspiration, but in understanding the physics at a level most people don't bother with. He understood that cobalt oxide had this layered crystal structure, like sheets stacked on top of each other with space in between. And lithium ions, small, mobile, they could slip between those sheets. When you charged the battery, you'd pull lithium ions out of the cobalt oxide. When you discharged it, they'd go back in, and the structure would hold. The lattice wouldn't collapse. The material wouldn't degrade. You could cycle it hundreds of times, thousands of times. This should break your brain for a second, because what Goodenough figured out, what took him years of systematic testing to confirm, was that you could design a material at the atomic level to do exactly what you needed. Not through trial and error, not through luck, through understanding how atoms arrange themselves and what properties emerge from that arrangement. He published this work in 1980. Lithium cobalt oxide is a cathode material, 4 volts, double Whittingham's battery, stable, rechargeable, scalable. This was the breakthrough. This was the invention that would eventually power everything, and almost no one cared. Because here's the problem with foundational insights: they don't look like products. They look like academic papers. They look like incremental improvements. They look like something a 58-year-old physicist in Oxford is publishing in a materials science journal that 300 people will read. There was no prototype phone, no demonstration laptop, no dramatic unveiling, just structure, just physics, just the quiet recognition that he'd solved the central problem, and the world didn't notice. Sony noticed eventually. In 1991, they commercialized the lithium-ion battery using Goodenough's cobalt oxide cathode. That's when the world changed. That's when the world changed. That's when portable electronics became possible. That's when your laptop stopped weighing 15 pounds and your phone stopped being attached to a wall. But Goodenough, he didn't get rich. He didn't become famous. He didn't even get much credit at first, because that's how foundational science works. The people who build the foundation, they're invisible. The people who turn it into products, who market it, who sell it, they get the recognition. Goodenough went back to work. He moved to the University of Texas at Austin. He kept researching. He kept teaching. He kept trying to improve battery chemistry, because 4 volts was good. But it wasn't enough. Not if you wanted electric cars. Not if you wanted grid-scale energy storage. Not if you wanted to actually solve the climate crisis. He developed lithium iron phosphate cathodes, safer than cobalt, cheaper, longer lasting. He kept working, past 70, past 80, past 90, and the world kept ignoring him until it didn't. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry. John Goodenough, age 97, oldest Nobel laureate in history. For work he published in 1980, 39 years earlier, but really if you count from when he started working on the problem, 57 years. Think about what that means. Think about working on something for more than half a century while everyone around you gets credit, gets funding, gets recognition for building on your work without acknowledging the foundation. Think about watching the world transform, watching lithium-ion batteries go from laboratory curiosity to ubiquitous technology, while your name remains mostly unknown outside specialist circles. Think about being 97 years old and finally being told you were right. Your inside mattered. We see it now. Most people would be bitter. Most people would have given up decades earlier. Most people would have moved on to something that offered faster rewards, quicker recognition, easier validation. Goodenough didn't. And here's why. Because he wasn't working for recognition. He was working because the problem was real, because the physics was beautiful, Because understanding how to move lithium ions through a crystal lattice without destroying the structure was intrinsically interesting whether or not anyone gave him credit for it. This is what genius actually looks like. Not the young prodigy, not the dramatic breakthrough, not the overnight success. Genius looks like someone who sees a structure no one else can see, works on it for decades without external validation, and trusts that if the physics is right, eventually the world will catch up. Your phone has a lithium-ion battery. Good enough's cathode chemistry right now. In your pocket. Your laptop, same thing. Your electric car, if you have one, same fundamental insight. The solar panels and wind turbines we're installing to save the planet, they need energy storage. Grid-scale batteries, lithium, same chemistry. Every single one of these devices, every application, every use case, they all trace back to a 58-year-old dyslexic physicist in Oxford who understood crystal structures better than anyone else and published a paper that almost no one read at the time. The impact is almost impossible to calculate. Billions of devices, trillions of dollars in economic value, an entire technological revolution that reshape how humans interact with information, with energy, with each other. And the person responsible kept showing up to his lab past age 100, not because he needed to, not because anyone expected him to, but because there were still problems to solve, still battery chemistries to improve, still physics to understand. He died in 2023, age 101, still working. You know what the hardest part of this story is? It's not the late recognition. It's not the 57-year wait for the Nobel Prize. It's not even the fact that he worked past 100. It's that we almost didn't notice him at all, because our system, the way we celebrate innovation, the way we assign credit, the way we tell stories about genius, it's built for the young, for the fast, for the dramatic. We love the college dropout who disrupts an industry, the teenage founder, the overnight success. We love stories where genius announces itself early and rewards follow quickly. But Goodenough's genius was structural, literal and metaphorical. He understood how atoms arrange themselves, how layers stack, how ions move through space. And that kind of understanding doesn't make for good headlines. It doesn't generate venture capital. It doesn't trend on social media. It just works. Quietly, foundationally, invisibly, until one day you realize that everything depends on it. And by then, decades have passed. The inventor is old. The moment has moved on. The credit has been distributed to people who built on the foundation without ever seeing who laid it. This should make you angry, but more than that, it should make you think about how we define success, about when we expect genius to appear, about who we're overlooking right now because they're too old, too slow, too quiet, too patient, about what happens when someone sees something true and works on it for 57 years without caring whether anyone notices. Goodenough used to say that his goal wasn't just better batteries. It was solving energy storage well enough that we could transition away from fossil fuels, that we could build a sustainable civilization. He knew in 1980, in 1990, and 2000 that climate change was going to be the defining challenge, and he knew that without good batteries, we couldn't solve it. Solar and wind are great, but the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. You need storage. You need to capture energy when it's abundant and release it when it's needed. You need batteries. And the batteries we have, the ones in your pocket, in your car, in the grid-scale installations being built right now, they exist because a dyslexic kid who couldn't read until age 12 grew up to understand crystal structures better than almost anyone alive. He didn't solve the whole problem. Energy storage still needs to get better, cheaper, safer, more sustainable. But he solved the central problem. He proved it was possible. He showed the path. And that's what foundational genius does. It doesn't solve everything. It solves the thing that makes everything else solvable. The Nobel Prize at 97. Think about what that number means. It means he was 39 when the prize was established. He could have won it young, could have been recognized early, could have spent his career being celebrated as a genius. But he wasn't, because the work takes time to matter. The insight takes decades to prove itself. The structure has to hold through millions of charge cycles, billions of devices, trillions of uses before anyone believes it's fundamental. Truth moves faster than recognition, but only just. And only if you're patient enough to wait. Good enough was patient, not passive, not resigned, but patient. There's a difference. Passive patience is giving up. It's accepting mediocrity. It's settling for good enough. And here's the irony. Good enough never settled for good enough. Active patience is continuing to work, continuing to improve, continuing to push forward while the world catches up. It's trusting that if the physics is right, eventually the applications will follow. Eventually the recognition will come. Eventually the truth will be undeniable. He worked past the point where most people retire, past the point where most people would have given up on recognition, past the point where most people would even be alive. And when the call came, when Stockholm finally called to tell him he'd won, he was in his office, still working, still trying to improve cathode chemistry, still trying to solve the next problem. Because that's what it means to see structure, to understand how things actually work at the level where understanding matters. You don't work for rewards. You work because the problem is real and the solution is possible and someone has to find it. Your pocket depends on this. Your laptop depends on this. Your ability to work remotely, to communicate instantly, to access information anywhere, all of it depends on a battery that wouldn't exist without good enough's insight. The electric car you might buy next, the grid storage that makes renewable energy viable, the civilization scale transition away from fossil fuels, all of it traces back to cobalt oxide cathodes and layered crystal structures and lithium ions sliding between atomic sheets without collapsing the lattice. 57 years from insight to recognition, but the insight was right from the beginning. The physics worked from the start. The world just needed time to catch up. And here's the thing, there are probably people working right now on problems that will matter in 50 years. On structures we don't yet understand, on insights that seem incremental today but will be foundational tomorrow. We're ignoring them, just like we ignored good enough, because they're not young enough, not fast enough, not dramatic enough, because their genius looks like patient structural work instead of flashy innovation, because they're building foundations instead of products. And in 50 years, we'll look back and wonder why we didn't pay attention, why we didn't celebrate them, why we waited until they were 97 to acknowledge what they'd known at 58. But by then it will be too late. They'll have spent their careers in obscurity, working on problems that mattered more than anyone realized, waiting for recognition that came too late to change their lives but just in time to validate their work. Good Enough's Nobel lecture delivered at 97, mind you, wasn't about celebrating the past. It was about the future, about what still needed to be done, about battery chemistries that still needed to be developed, about energy storage problems that still needed to be solved. At 97, after 57 years of waiting for recognition, he gave a lecture about the work that remained. This should tell you everything you need to know about how genius actually works. It's not about the destination. It's not about the award. It's not about finally being recognized. It's about the work, the structure, the physics, the truth. And the truth is this: lithium-ion batteries change the world, but they're not enough. We need better, safer, cheaper, more sustainable. Good Enough knew this. Safer, cheaper, more sustainable. Good Enough knew this at 97, at 100, until the day he died. And somewhere right now, there's probably someone, maybe 58, maybe 65, maybe 70, who's working on the next breakthrough, who understands something about solid-state batteries, or sodium-ion chemistry, or quantum dots, or some material we haven't even discovered yet, and they're working without recognition, without funding, without anyone caring. And in 50 years, if we're lucky, we'll realize what they built. We'll give them a prize. We'll celebrate their genius. Too late for it to matter to them, but just in time to prove that they were right all along. There's a moment, I don't know exactly when it happened, but there's a moment in every foundational scientist's life when they realize recognition isn't coming, when they realize the work they've done, the insight they've had, the problem they've solved It's not going to be celebrated. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Most people quit at that moment, or they shift to something more visible, something that gets cited more, funded more, recognized more. Good enough didn't quit, he just kept working, and this is the thing about structural insight. It doesn't need validation to be true. The crystal lattice holds or it doesn't. The lithium ions move or they don't. The battery works or it doesn't. Reality is the validation. Everything else is just noise. He trusted reality more than recognition, and reality eventually proved him right, 57 years later. But right. His name is John Goodenough. Goodenough. But good enough was never the goal. Good enough was never acceptable. Good enough was the joke people made without realizing they were describing the opposite of what he represented. Because good enough was precise, rigorous, uncompromising in his pursuit of understanding how atoms arrange themselves and what properties emerge from that arrangement. He solved the central problem of energy storage, not perfectly, not finally, but foundationally, in a way that made everything else possible. And then he waited, not passively, not bitterly, but patiently, actively, continuously working while the world caught up. 97 years old when they called, 101 when he died, still working, still improving, still solving. Your pocket is powered by his insight. Your future might be saved by it. And the real lesson, isn't about batteries. It's about genius, about how it appears later than we expect, works longer than we imagine, and gets recognized far later than it deserves. It's about trusting structure over speed, insight over innovation, truth over trends. It's about being willing to work for 57 years on a problem that matters without caring whether anyone notices. Because if the physics is right, if the structure holds, eventually, the world catches up. Eventually, reality wins. And once reality wins, once the structure proves itself, once the insight becomes foundational, there is no going back.